My mother-in-law and my wife kicked me out of my house, so I sold the house and put them both out on the street. Now, my wife is asking me not to get a divorce. Let me admit that I may be the bad guy for thinking this way. I'm not sure what you would have done, but listen to me. My problem is that my mother-in-law is overly nosy. She has an opinion on all our matters. Her interference infuriates me, especially in financial matters. These days, I feel like I'm competing with my mother-in-law for my wife's attention and care. I, 41 years old, have been married to my wife Mandy for 7 years. Before my mother-in-law entered our lives, or rather, our house, there were no warning signs in our marriage. We were quite happy and satisfied with our lives. Everything started to go wrong 2 years ago when my mother-in-law had a serious accident. Half of her body was fractured. She had little chance, but she survived. She could hardly sit and lead a normal life. It seemed distant. After spending a month in the hospital, it was time to discharge her. Mandy is an only child. Her father left her mother when she was a child and is not part of their lives. Details about him are not relevant, so I will omit them. My mother-in-law had been living alone until her accident. In this condition, she couldn't survive alone, so Mandy insisted that we had no choice. We couldn't leave my mother-in-law alone. I modified the guest room to create a comfortable space for her. During the first year, she remained outside our business, mainly because her bed was confined. We lived our usual life, except that Mandy was very busy taking care of her mother along with her full-time work. I had to take care of my mother-in-law when Mandy was at work. Our time as a couple was significantly reduced because Mandy was always busy and tired with so many responsibilities. I supported her until her mother recovered. Honestly, I never wanted my mother-in-law to live in my house. Who would? But seeing the situation, I accepted. I thought this would be a temporary arrangement. But it seems that my mother-in-law has no intention of leaving my house. I mean, she has recovered from her illness. Her fractured bones have healed, but this woman does not want to return home. She can walk and talk a lot, but she is still living in my house for free. I'm not being cruel, guys. Imagine living with an unfriendly mother-in-law for 2 years. Mandy and I have full-time jobs. We barely have time for each other during the week. We look forward to the weekend for our quality time, but that also seems to be hijacked by my mother-in-law. She asks Mandy to take her to the hospital for a checkup or perhaps to the lounge or shopping every weekend. She has something programmed for Mandy every weekend. My mother-in-law is fit to drive, but she does not. She says the accident scared her to get behind the wheel. She could take an Uber, but no, she doesn't want to. She wants a free trip for Mandy. I complained, and as a solution, I was told to join them. Seriously, that's a solution. I feel like a third wheel between the mother-daughter duo. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There is more. As soon as my mother-in-law began to recover, she started sticking her nose into everything. She commented on the aesthetics of the house, even on the structure, saying certain things were poorly constructed. She even had us repaint her room because it didn't match her previous color. Those were her words. Mandy used to get annoyed with her mother's comments, but gradually she started following her mother's instructions. She painted the room, changed furniture, and even had Mandy change her wardrobe. I hate it when Mandy follows her mother's instructions like that. I often resist their actions and try to make Mandy understand that she should not give in to her mother's demands. She seemed convinced, but then I saw her doing what her mother told her to do. When comparing it, she just said, "I changed my mind or I realized that my mother was right, so I did this." These little incidents have been building up inside me, and last month I exploded with Mandy. I listed all the incidents that were bothering me. She sobbed and confessed that her mother had been manipulating her. According to Mandy, my mother-in-law has been using her accident to manipulate her, telling her things like, "If I had died in the accident, how lonely would your life be today? And what if I had another accident and died this time? You would regret not listening to me, wouldn't you?" If this is true, then her mother is toxic and Mandy is naive enough to fall into her manipulation. I asked Mandy when my mother-in-law would be returning home. She was surprised by my question. I don't know what was wrong with that. She exploded. She said she could not understand the fact that I was anticipating that her mother would live alone after such a terrifying accident. I tried to explain that I didn't want to throw her out, but she should eventually move, right? Because she has recovered her previous health and can live alone. I even suggested that my mother-in-law could move closer to our home so that we could visit immediately in case of need. But Mandy stood her ground, saying how I could ask my mother to leave after such a terrible accident. I couldn't take it anymore and let go. Your mother had an accident and has recovered. It wasn't serious enough that she could not be separated from her. Mandy looked at me with red eyes and said I was wishing for a terminal illness for her mother. This happened about 2 weeks ago and she's still mad at me. I have not been disappointed either. I don't think I said anything bad this time. We are not talking. We share the bed, but we look at the walls and pretend the other does not exist. It is becoming very toxic to live in the house. I want to run away. She spends most of her time in my mother-in-law's room or with her. I don't think this is my fault at all, but I realize that I should have managed this better. I want the best for my mother-in-law, but I certainly don't want her in the house. How do I face this problem? Update: the situation has been developing little by little in recent months. To summarize and maintain relevance, let me start from where I left off. A few days after my last message, Mandy hugged me while we slept. She apologized, saying it was childish to take things to the extreme. I wanted to ask her stance on moving my mother-in-law to her house, but I held back and postponed the discussion for later. I didn't want to ruin the moment, you know? She asked me for a night out. I was happy that she tried to improve the relationship. But boy, was I wrong. It was a trap. During a perfect and welcoming dinner, she dropped a bomb. Her mother had sold her house and now she would live permanently with us. I got angry. She whispered for me to calm down because others were looking at us. I felt trapped. How could she be calm? I mean, how could she decide this without consulting me? It was neither a request nor a discussion, but rather information presented to me as a fact. I didn't want to finish dinner and left in a rage. She followed me to the car. She insisted on talking. I refused to listen to her. She shouted that she planned the dinner so that we could discuss this issue outside the home because her mother would be at home. I knew I would get angry, and I didn't want her mom to see us like that, so I screamed. Exactly, that's my point. This is going to happen if she lives with us. We cannot have privacy. You want us to spend every night outside for the rest of our lives because we cannot have the house to ourselves. She murmured that we would have our room for our time. I asked her why she didn't give me this news in the room. Then she said I would survive and her mother would feel bad. I felt like I was talking to a wall. I asked her to go home alone because she needed space. She refused to get out of the car, so I got out all at once. I took a cab and went to a local bar. I called my colleague, told him about my miserable life, and got drunk. When I came home, I saw Mandy sitting with her mother in her room. I went to bed and fell asleep. My colleague suggested that I have a rational conversation with Mandy. I didn't want to, but I still tried. I asked her why her mother sold the house and what her plan for the future was. First, she began to cry, saying, "You treated me so roughly. Last night you ran out of the restaurant and everyone was looking at me. It was so embarrassing." Then I had to drive home alone and explain the whole situation to Mom.